and fuck, I'm losing my words. Hey guys, what's up? My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everyone who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, happy True Crime Thursday. Welcome back to my channel, or just welcome if you've never been here before. If you haven't been here before, feel free to like this video and subscribe and go and binge watch all of my other videos, because Christmas is coming up and if you want to be on Santa's good list, then that's what you have to do. So thank you if you do, and if you don't, your mom's. I'm super happy to be covering this case today because it was actually recommended in the comments of one of my last videos and I had never heard of it before, and it is super bizarre, so I'm glad that I kind of got lost down this rabbit hole because it's just like wild, and someone was convicted for this crime, but I still feel like it's not solved. Like, it doesn't really make sense, and we'll get to that in a minute, but like it's wild. So thank you so much to the person who recommended this, and if anyone else has any recommendations or suggestions, what is this top doing? Like, seriously, I don't know. Are they meant to sit like up here? Because if it is, it's not staying. Like, if you have any recommendations, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Jeffrey McDonald was born on the 12th of October 1943 in Queens, New York, and he grew up in Long Island. He grew up with a very strict father who expected complete obedience from him. He expected perfect grades, he expected perfect physical achievements, he expected the absolute best from his children. And it was this strict upbringing that actually resulted in a really good teenager. He had really good grades and he was very well mannered, he was very well behaved, he got a lot of sporting achievements, and he overall was just sort of like a stellar kid. He was also super popular in high school, and he was actually voted prom king, as well as being voted most likely to succeed and being voted most popular. In 1944, while he was still in high school, he met a girl called Colette Stevenson, and he thought Colette was stunning. He was the kind of guy who liked a lot of girls, like all the girls, but he specifically said that when he saw Colette, she was just so attractive, she was just so beautiful, and it was just unlike any other girl that he had ever seen. So he had a really big crush on her, and they built a friendship, and that eventually led to a relationship, but Colette broke it off before they went off to college. When they went to college, they went to different schools. Jeffrey originally had a 3-year scholarship at Princeton University, so he went there and he ended up dating another girl while he was there, but that eventually fell through and they broke up, and so he moved to a second college, and this is where he started to date Colette again. This time though, Colette was very different fundamentally as a person. She was very withdrawn, she was very afraid of the world, she didn't like to put herself out there anymore, she lost a lot of confidence and a lot of self-esteem, and she was really genuinely afraid of the world and of people and of everything that the world entails, I guess you could say. And so Jeffrey took it upon himself to take on this like protective type of role over her. In 1963, the couple found out that they were pregnant with their first daughter, and this was the end of Jeffrey's flirtatious interactions with all of the other girls, because as I said, he liked all of the other girls and he had always had a wandering eye. And so he decided that that all needed to end because they needed to get married for the sake of this baby. So the following year, they had their first baby called Kimberly. When Colette had Kimberly, she decided to abandon her studies and her goals to be a stay-at-home mum, and it really felt like it was like the safest option for her because she was kind of afraid of everything else. So staying at home and like doing her best for her children was like the safe option and something she knew she wouldn't fail at. She knew she was going to be a really good mum. In 1967, they had their second daughter, Kristen. I always go to say Kirsten because I know a girl called Kirsten, and my brain doesn't get it. I'm trying, so I apologize if I continually say Kirsten. Like, what is that? I don't know. In 1969, Jeffrey joined the United States Army and went on to do a physician course. He was assigned to a Special Forces group as a group surgeon in North Carolina, and his wife and 2 kids came to live with him in a housing estate specifically designed for married soldiers. So now Jeffrey was a Green Beret doctor. He'd earned his rank as a captain, and he was planning to further study medicine at Yale University, which was obviously a pretty great achievement. So Colette at this time was super happy. She was super proud of her husband. She had always been very supportive of his military endeavors and his education, and so she was just over the moon. And at this time she was also pregnant with their first boy, so she was so excited to have her first son because she obviously already had the 2 daughters, and life just was really good at this point of time. For Christmas in 1969, Jeffrey actually got the family a pony, and the girls were so excited. They just thought this was the best thing ever. It was so cool. They were so excited. And Colette went home and she wrote letters, and she wrote in her diary about how happy she was, about how great of a husband Jeffrey was, and how she was just over the moon. She couldn't wait to have her son, her first ever son. She just thought life was perfect. He was doing really well at work. The girls were super excited from Christmas. It was a really good day, and she wrote all that down and she sent it out to her friends. On the 16th of February 1970, Jeffrey went to work as usual, and he was working at a medical clinic. So on this day, he had a bit of a run-in with a patient of his who was a drug addict. So this patient had gone away on tour, and he got addicted to heroin. And so when this guy asked for methadone, he was like, no, I'm not giving you methadone. Like, you shouldn't use drugs. Like, he didn't care. So methadone is something that they give you when you're withdrawing from heroin, and it tries to help like wean you down off of the heroin. Jeffrey was notorious for disliking drug use and drug users. He was definitely the wrong doctor to go to if you were a drug user. So Jeffrey didn't really think anything of it, and he came home at around 5 p.m. just as normal. Colette was actually taking a class that night, and so she wouldn't be home until 10 p.m. So Jeffrey hung out with the girls. He said that he made them dinner, and then he watched Kimberly's favorite TV show with her, and then he put them to bed at around 7:30, 8 o'clock. When Colette got home, he said that they had a drink together, they watched some TV, and then Colette excused herself and went to bed. Jeffrey says that he fell asleep on the couch and he didn't go to bed until hours later, and when he did go to bed, he found Kimberly in bed with Colette, and she had wet the bed. So instead of him wanting to move them around or change the sheets and like do all that stuff, he just decided he'd go back out and sleep on the lounge. At 3:42 a.m., Jeffrey called the military police and reported that somebody had been stabbed. Within 10 minutes, the military police were there, and they walked into something that they did not expect at all. They found Jeffrey laying on the floor, face down, his arm draped over Colette's dead body. She had been beaten really severely. Both her arms were broken from like trying to guard her face. She had been stabbed 21 times with an ice pick, and then a further 16 times with a knife. Jeffrey was unconscious when they found him, and he had also been stabbed. He had been stabbed down there, and that resulted in a collapsed lung. But he woke up fairly quickly and straight away asked about his kids. They found Kimberly with blunt force trauma to her head, and she had been stabbed 9 times. She had been beaten so badly that her skull was fractured and her cheekbone was sticking out, protruding out of her face. Then they found Kristen, who was only 2 years old, with 16 ice pick stab wounds. and almost 30 knife wounds. 2 years old. So Jeffrey was taken to hospital and then he was taken in for questioning, and he said that he woke up in the middle of the night to his wife screaming his name. Allegedly, she was screaming, "Jeffrey, Jeffrey, help me, why are they doing this?" And then he also claims that he heard Kimberly screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." He says that he woke up and saw a woman in the corner of the room holding a candle, and she was wearing a floppy hat and a blonde wig. And once she sort of realized that he was awake, she started chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." Yeah. At this point, he says he was hit over the head and attacked by 2 white men and 1 black man, and this is where he was stabbed and collapsed. When he came to, he says that he crawled to Colette and attempted to give her mouth to mouth, but he said that every time he blew air into her mouth, it would just gurgle blood out of her chest where she had been stabbed, which is really horrific. He also said that the killers didn't kill Colette, they eviscerated her. That's how badly attacked and injured she was. He claims that he checked on both girls, found them dead, and so crawled back to Colette, which is when he took his own pajama top off and draped it over her because her boobs had sort of come out. Obviously, she'd just been stabbed repeatedly and she was a bit of a mess, so he put his PJ top on top of her, and that's where he draped his arm around her and then passed out. The police found the word pig written in Colette's blood on the headboard of the bed, and so they immediately drew connections between this case and the Charles Manson murders, which happened only 6 months prior to these murders. So the police wondered if perhaps, you know, some of his followers might have been involved, or perhaps it was like a copycat killer. They just thought that was a very odd coincidence. They also wondered if perhaps that patient from earlier on in the day had maybe come back and tried to get some kind of revenge on Jeffrey, but then they also thought that was a little bit extreme of a reason. Like, it didn't give him any drugs, it didn't help him. Like, that's a very big vendetta to have, you know, so they just weren't really sure at first. The team of investigators were a part of the military police, and they found the club that was used to beat everyone, as well as the ice pick, not far away, just in the backyard, and they found the knife nearby also. They found blood spots in the kitchen as well as scattered sort of around the house that needed to be tested, and they also found a hair in both Kristen and Colette's hands. Kristen's only 2, don't forget, 2 years old, and there's a hand in her. Right from the get-go though, the investigators came to the conclusion that the crime scene wasn't necessarily how it should be, or at least they didn't think that it was. They thought it looked somewhat staged, just the way that things were knocked over and placed, and it seemed really odd to a lot of the investigators. In the lounge room where Jeffrey claims there was obviously this big scuffle and fight and he was stabbed, the coffee table was knocked over, but the investigators at the time determined that the coffee table was top heavy, so had it have been knocked over, it would have fallen and landed in a different way to what they had found it. It would have been like fully knocked over, not just on its side. There was also a plant that had been spilled out of its pot, but then the pot, like the actual pot, was standing up, but the plant was not, and they were like, that's odd. And so there were all these really, really small details that they just didn't think made sense, and so it led them to believe that this was perhaps a staged murder scene. They also determined pretty early on that due to Jeffrey's medical knowledge as a surgeon, as a doctor, that he had the means and knowledge necessary to potentially self-harm in a way that was safe enough to live, if that makes sense. Like, had he have wanted to stage a murder and he wanted to look like he had been attacked too, he more than anyone else would have a better understanding of like where he could stab himself or where to go that would cause damage but not enough damage to be fatal. They also found a magazine in the lounge room that had a massive feature article about the Manson murders. They thought they were onto something here. So they formed a theory that the couple had an argument about Kimberly wetting the bed, and they claimed that Jeffrey just lost his temper. He was mad at Colette for letting her stay in the bed because she often wet the bed, and he didn't like that. He didn't want to go to bed in a bed that had been peed in, and so he just lost it and he attacked Colette. He stabbed Colette after he took Kimberly to the room, but then Kimberly heard the commotion and came into the room, and so he killed Kimberly. And then he decided, oh fuck, I just killed my wife and kid, I better go kill the other one. That was pretty much their theory. That's what set this all off, which is a weak theory, really. Now, despite this case being handled by people who are supposed to know what they're doing, they're obviously the military police, they're supposed to be very professional and have a very high standard in what they're doing. This case just had fuck up after fuck up after fuck up right from the beginning of the investigation. It was ridiculous. There were bloody footprints found in the house that were supposed to be tested that were lost before they ever got tested. Colette's hands weren't bagged when she was carried away, which is sort of standard practice because you can get a lot of forensic information from someone's hands after they've been murdered, because obviously she was trying to block herself. She could have DNA on her hands. She had she had a hair in her hand. That's important. Never did that. The house, aka the crime scene, was never sealed off. It was never closed to the public, and so there were people coming and going. There were soldiers coming and going. There were ambulance drivers coming and going. There were neighbors coming in and out of the house, which obviously contaminates everything. How are you supposed to get a good forensic scope of the house if there is a million people coming in and out of the house? That said, they did find fibers from Jeffrey's pajama top in all of the girls' bedrooms, as well as under Kristen's nails. However, in the lounge room where he claims he was attacked and stabbed, there was no fibers, which is odd. Blood-stained splinters were also found from the club that was used to beat the girls with in all three rooms, except again the lounge room where he claims he was hit over the head. They also found Kimberly's blood in the main bedroom, which made them question why would these acid is groovy weirdo psycho killers kill Kimberly and then carry her back to her bed, because she was found in her bed. So why would they do that? So at this point it seemed like the police really genuinely believed Jeffrey had something to do with these murders. So at this point, the military police seemed like they thought Jeffrey had something to do with the murders. But it was also the military police who kept losing all of the evidence, which, if they did just lose it, they're shitty fucking, military police. And if they lost it, they're shitty fucking military police. It was just a bizarre, really awful investigation. The police also confirmed that on their way to the crime scene, they had actually seen a woman in a blonde wig and a floppy hat walking down the street not far from the house. This was at 4 a.m. and the police knew her identity. She had previously been used as a police informant. She was a known drug user. Her boyfriend was a known drug user. And despite Jeffrey telling them that there was a woman in the house with a blonde wig and a floppy hat, they didn't stop her, they didn't question her, and they wouldn't for some time. When Jeffrey went to court, he went to a military court, and it was a very, very high profile case. It was probably one of the biggest military cases in history, at least at that point. It was absolutely huge, and so there was a lot of media coverage. So the military police, their entire theory essentially was based around the staged crime scene, and so they presented all of those details, and the judge actually went to the crime scene himself. He went to Jeffrey's house and kicked over the coffee table to see for himself, and it landed the way that it landed in the crime scene. It didn't land the way that the military police believed that it would because it was top heavy. So he basically was like, yeah, nah, you're wrong. Jeffrey's lawyer also made a very good point about the crime scene being completely contaminated by everyone coming and going. There was an ambulance driver who stole Jeffrey's wallet from the crime scene, which goes to show how unsecure it was. Like, that's ridiculous. There was also officers who admitted to picking up the pot plant for no reason. This made it really, really hard to trust evidence or lack of evidence when it came to the DNA and the way things were found, because obviously it had all been tampered with. So the judge exonerated him and suggested that the police look into Helena Stokley, which is the woman in the blonde wig and the floppy hat. So after he was found innocent, Jeffrey moved to California, where he decided he wanted to start a new life. And when he moved, he got a brand new flashy car and he started dating again. And from the outside looking in, it seemed like he was living his best life. He was back to his liking other girls in town ways. And for the people who were still mourning back in North Carolina, the people who were related to, you know, the family, they were still mourning, and it was hard to watch him move on like that. And shortly after moving, Jeffrey actually went on a talk show about the murders, and he was there to discuss the murders, but really all he wanted to discuss was how the military was so wrong and how dare they accuse him, and they really had it out for him. And his entire focus was on the military. It wasn't on justice for the girls. It wasn't on the murders. It wasn't on the fact that no one had been, you know, found guilty of this crime. It was primarily the military. And at one point he even says, like, they had no evidence. They just didn't have any. And he laughs. And it seemed really strange. And again, to those people who were still mourning, that sucked to see. That really was hard for a lot of the family to watch. Colette's stepdad was especially bothered by Jeffrey's lack of, not remorse necessarily if he didn't do it, but it didn't seem like he cared. And maybe he did. Like, everyone obviously goes through things in their own way, but looking from the outside in, it seemed like he could not give a flying fuck. He bought a boat, he bought a car, like, he was living life, he was chilling. And her stepdad believed he had something to do with the murders, and he was adamant that he would get this man thrown in jail. And luckily for him, one of the lead investigators who were on the case agreed with him and thought that Jeffrey was guilty, and so they sort of teamed up to try and take it to the courts, and they pestered a lot of officials and higher up people until they got him to court. In 1975, their hard work finally paid off when the grand jury was convinced to indict Jeffrey. This time the prosecutors went in a lot more prepared than they had the last time. The last time they went to trial, they presented the idea that he was set off by Kimberly wetting the bed, and that's what led to him killing Colette, and then it escalated from there. But they sort of threw in, oh, there might have been infidelity there, like that might be why. And so their motive was very weak at the time, whereas going into it this time, they had clearly defined it as, no, he was set off by her wetting the bed. He had a history of like tempers about this type of stuff. She had a history of wetting the bed, and they went in with a lot more conviction and, you know, confidence, which always helps. They also argued that if Jeffrey had have been attacked in the lounge room, his pajama top fibers would have been in that room just like they were in every other room, especially since he was stabbed. It makes a lot of sense for there to be fibers in the lounge room, but there wasn't. And they also claimed that had he have really been attacked by like 3 men, his injuries would have been a lot worse, especially if they were to believe that this was a random attack or that it was attack from the man at the medical clinic. If they wanted to get revenge on Jeffrey, they would have attacked him worse than the children, surely. And if it was a random attack, they would have taken him out first because he, as a military man, even though he was just a doctor, not just a doctor, but he was a doctor, surely that would have been like the biggest threat to them. Do you know what I mean? They also found this time around that if you scrunched up his pajama top in the right way, every little hole in the pajama top matched every little stab wound in her chest made from the ice pick. So they proposed that he had put that over her before stabbing her. They also brought up blood because every single person in this family had a different blood type, which is like not heard of. That I don't even know if that's like a thing. I don't know if that was an accident or like, I probably should have looked into that a little bit more, I'm sorry, but like that's not a heard of thing. At least I don't think that it is very often, at least. But it made it very easy to tell whose blood was whose. And so they could tell that Jeffrey's blood was in the girls' room and in the bedroom, but it wasn't in the lounge room, which is where he was stabbed, which doesn't really make sense. Of course, his defense had an argument for everything. They claimed that the shirt being draped over her and stabbed through, of course that could line up because it's material. So you can move material where you want to move material so that it lines up. So that's what they claimed, that, you know, had he have actually stabbed her through the shirt would have moved. So for it to all line up didn't really make sense. They also said, yeah, a lot of the physical evidence doesn't necessarily line up with Jeffrey's account of the story, but that's because the crime scene was contaminated, it was tampered with, it's not reliable information. And this is when the defense pointed fingers back at Helena Stokley and said, hey, girl with the floppy hat, she did this. And this is what makes it very, very confusing, is that Helena Stokley had on numerous occasions confessed to the murders, confessed to being in the house and confessed to having a part in killing the family. And she had confessed this to friends, to strangers, to an officer even. She admitted to holding a candle and chanting about acid as well. And on top of that, her boyfriend that I mentioned earlier, who was also into drugs and was known for being quite a violent man, he just so happened to be the man who was in the clinic that day with Jeffrey asking for methadone, which is a very, very, very big coincidence. And I know a lot of people who don't believe in coincidences who would not believe that that was a coincidence. But when she was questioned, she basically just said, I was on way too many drugs that night. I don't remember what happened. Like, I can't tell you. I don't remember. And so the judge decided that she wasn't a reliable witness because of the amount of drugs that she did. She could have, like, she wasn't in the right state of mind to be a witness, which is kind of ludicrous. Like, that's ridiculous, especially when she was on drugs when they used her as a police informant. So she was in her right mind enough then when it was like to their benefit, but now it wasn't. Jeffrey also saw a number of psychologists and psychiatrists, and none of them returned with any findings of any like sociopathic, psychopathic tendencies. There was no antisocial traits about him. He seemed really well overall, like mental health sound. He was sound-minded, but that was actually thrown out as evidence because the judge decided that it wasn't a insanity plea, and therefore his mental state didn't matter. Jeffrey McDonald was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder for Colette and Kimberly and 1 count of first-degree murder for Kristen. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences that needed to be served concurrently. But this isn't the end of the story. I'm sorry, it keeps going, there's more. After he was convicted, he and his legal team immediately started working on an appeal. They discovered that during the trial, the prosecution had stumbled across evidence that they hadn't shared with the defense, which is super illegal. Like, you can't do that. If you find evidence, you have to present it so that they can defend it. Like, they discovered that there was a half-filled syringe filled with blood in the house at the crime scene that night. And Colette wasn't a drug user as far as anyone knew. The girls obviously weren't drug users, and as far as anyone knew, Jeffrey McDonald, the guy who hated drugs, also was not a drug user. But there was a syringe in the house with blood in it, which means someone had used it for drugs, most likely. They also found a long blonde hair underneath Colette's body, and it wasn't her hair. They also found candle wax on the floor, and they found that a patient of Jeffrey's had actually called the home phone that night and asked for him because for whatever reason he needed advice or something. And a woman had answered and laughed and was really creepy, and he was super confused and perplexed, like what was going on, who is this? And she just did this weird maniacal laugh, and then someone in the background was like, stop talking, like hang up the phone. And so that is like, that's proof, that's a witness that can contest to the fact that there was a woman laughing weirdly in the house on the night of the murders. And this man was never asked to testify. Why was he not asked to testify? He can prove, like, surely by timestamp, surely. That is like pretty important evidence. Helena and her boyfriend both died before the defense could ever question them again, and so any hope that they would get them to confess or they would get them convicted for the murders were just thrown out the window. To this day, Jeffrey maintains his innocence. He has continually said that he never killed his family, he would never hurt his family, he had nothing to do with it. And he said that if what it takes for me to get out of here and to get my freedom back and to live my life is to admit or confess to killing my family, and don't take this as a quote just in case I fuck it up, just saying, then I'm never gonna go home. He's never ever going to say that he killed his family because he says that he didn't. And so he would rather stay in prison for the rest of his life than to come out and say that he did something so horrible when he didn't. And that is the case of the McDonald family murders. I think this one is so fucking wild. I really still don't it seems really likely that Helena had something to do with the murder, but like, did Jeffrey have anything to do with it too? Like, I don't know. I don't get it. I just really don't get it. So please let me know your thoughts down below. Do you believe Jeffrey's story? Do you think that it was Helena? Do you think that Helena and Jeffrey were like involved together? Like, what do you think? Please let me know in the comments down below, or you can head over to my social medias, which are all linked in the description down below, because I would love to hear your opinions and help me formulate my own, because I don't fucking know. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my new videos. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Make sure you guys are being safe out there. Don't do acid, don't date men in the military, and most importantly, don't fuck with crime scene, you motherfuckers. Like, what the fuck? Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe. Bye. You'd think they'd all... okay, never mind. I figured it out in my brain. You can too. And then Colette excused herself. Excuse me?